It's yet another weekend and it's good to be here on your screens. A very good evening to you and welcome to Africa Speaks right on Pan-African Television, which is coming to you live from our studios at Abelempe 48 Swanika Street, Accra, Ghana. We are broadcasting live across some 46 African countries and some part of Europe. Yesterday, workers across the world marked May Day, and 5 days ago, South Africa marked Freedom Day. And as we speak, activists in Swaziland are being detained for doing something most of us take for granted, organizing for the right to vote. These are not separate stories. They are the same story told from different corners of the continent. And tonight, we are going to tell it properly. Please stay with us. And now let's start with a spotlight segment where we begin in Swaziland, the only country on this continent where political parties remain constitutionally banned, where a king rules by decree, and where demanding a vote is enough to get you arrested. What is unfolding right now is not a sudden development. After the 2021 uprising, when security forces opened fire on protesters and hundreds were arrested, the repression did not stop. It simply became less visible. Activists are being detained, legal counsel is being blocked, and the movements are under active surveillance. Tonight, we put it back under light where it belongs.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of today's Spotlight segment on the Africa Speaks show. My name is Danny Otuesante. Now tonight on Africa Speaks, we return to the Kingdom of Swaziland, or Swatini, Africa's last absolute monarchy. Once again, where a growing crackdown on activists is exposing the deep-seated oppression that characterizes the regime. Pro-democracy activists, students leaders, and trade union organizers are facing a coordinated campaign of repression marked by arrest, surveillance, and intimidation. Recently, Non-Tetalilo Nkamsile Nkambule, Treasurer General of the Swaziland Youth Congress and People's United Democratic Movement (CADA), was designated as wanted on authorities based on absurd charges. Similarly, the Secretary General of the Swaziland National Association of Teachers was arrested untouched. At the center of this crisis is the political struggle itself. Under King Mswatini III, Swaziland operates as an absolute monarchy where executive, legislative, and judicial powers ultimately rest on the crown. Millions are pledged on his comfort while the people struggle. Previous protests have been met with severe repression. In 2021, pre-democracy protests, which erupted over demands for political reform, were met with forced security forces used live ammunition, resulting in death, injuries, and widespread arrest. Yet, accountability for those actions remain elusive. Today, the same tension persists. Activists are not only demanding multi-party democracy, they are calling for economic justice, fair wages, public accountability, and redistribution of national wealth. From underground organizing to regional solidarity, campaigns activists are finding ways to keep their demands alive, pushing for a system that reflects the will of the people, not just authority of the monarchy. The movement in Swaziland has led to an international solidarity campaign where activists across the world have stood in solidarity with their comrades resisting the monarchy. In this episode, we'll hear from the ground in Swaziland as well as from the activists in solidarity with those in the trenches. We'll hear about the recent development, the political economy of the country that sustains the monarchy, and the vision of a different country that people are fighting for. What will the future of Swaziland be? How will the balance of the forces play out? Stay tuned and know more. My name is Danny Otuesante.
Thank you very much, Daniel Otuesante, for bringing us up to speed the happenings in Swaziland. Now we are joined by the president of PUDEMO, the People's United Democratic Party, the organization that has led the democratic struggle in Swaziland for decades at enormous personal cost to its members. We want to understand what is happening on the ground, what's the movement need from the rest of the continent, and what African solidarity actually requires in practice. Let's get started. Welcome, Comrade Louise, on our show on Africa Speaks this night. We've heard about, the crackdown of activists in Swaziland over the past few weeks. We know that there's been an increase in the repression of activists across Swaziland, and this includes the threat against your own organization, Pudemo, and also Comrade Non Chechelelo, who we had, and other political activists. Could you tell us a bit about, the current context that has led to these heightened threats?
Thank you very much for affording us opportunity, and good day to Pan-African television viewers and to yourself too. We have sort of gotten accustomed to this because every time the king is to host a major jamboree where he invites his friends into some show that seeks to pretend everything is well in Swaziland, there's always a clampdown on our activists, particularly activists of the student union, our own youth league, Swayoko, that Comrade Nonsatsele Longhambule that you have just referenced to is the Treasurer General of, and Pudemo, of course, including the trade union movement. So what transpired in the weeks leading to this jamboree that we saw last week was that there's been a series of SNAS, which is the Swaziland National Union of Students, which is the students' union, coordinated protests by students. Mainly, these protests are centered around dissatisfaction in the institutions of Highland.
Right.
Now, SNAS has just returned from Congress, where most of Swayoko activists, which is the Youth League of Pudemo, were elected into the leadership of the student union.
Right.
And the regime was extremely unhappy about this, and we knew that what was going to follow was a clampdown. But parallel to that, the public sector unions have been mobilizing because government had just announced that government doesn't have money, so there will be no notching for public servants, workers. And they were calling a series of consultative meetings. The response of the state, as usual, was the clampdown, targeting mainly the leaders of these formations, the leaders of Swayoko, the leaders of the teachers' union, which is the leading union within the umbrella of the public sector unions, and of course the leaders of SNAS. Right. And it is for this reason then that we found ourselves where we are, where a number of student leaders have had to flee the country, and some had to go underground within the country. As recent as yesterday, the University of Swaziland announced the expulsion of the Secretary General of the Student Representative Council there and another member of the SRC. And this is all but a pattern of this clampdown that you are referring to. And Pades Pudemo were determined to fight back.
Right. You see, when you started, you told us that this is not something new. There's been a long history of repression and attacks against political leaders and activists in Swaziland. And you yourself have even faced some attempts on your life. Could you tell us how people's movements in the country have resisted this repression?
Our movement will be celebrating 43 years of existence in July this year. And for the past 42 years, we have withstood a series of attacks, mainly from the regime, but even at times from friends of the regime outside the country. These attacks have taken form of arbitrary arrests, illegal raids, vicious kidnappings and assaults, and bombings, targeting our movable and immovable infrastructure. But through it all, the conviction and determination of Swazis who formed this organization called Pudemo to free themselves from royal aristocracy have seen them fighting on, and we remain determined that notwithstanding all these things, We are determined to see our motherland free. We want to see Swaziland joining the rest of the continent as a free nation where its own citizens have a right to elect their own government, as opposed to what is happening now, where the king is responsible for appointing government. So yes, it has not been easy, and that's why some of us find ourselves in exiles. Some of our own comrades, like our former Secretary General, Comrade Tulan Masego, have had to pay the ultimate price when he was assassinated. And there were other many Swazis who had to lose their lives, unfortunately. But through it all, we draw inspiration from our comrades who are in prison, who, notwithstanding the harsh prison conditions, have always said to us, we must struggle on, and we must never, never let go. So we remain unrelenting in our determination to free our country.
Right. You have to remain unrelenting in your determination to free a country. It's quite unfortunate that as it stands now, Swaziland remains one of the last absolute monarch in the world. What has sustained this structure? And what are some of the radical changes that are needed to dismantle this structure that oppresses the people of Swaziland?
Well, what has sustained this regime for this long is external support,
right,
mainly from the United States of America,
absolutely,
and from the United Kingdom, and from the Chinese province of Taiwan that purports to be a country in itself, and some few Arab states. And the reason they've done this is that in our own analysis, the imperial forces have understood that they need a country next to South Africa that will be a containing force to South Africa. And that's why then they identify Swaziland, because they knew that it is an amenable monarchy who has love for finer things in life and who's available for sale so long as he can get money to look after his many wives and throw endless lavish parties. And that's why you would see that in the entire continent, the only country that has diplomatic relations with Taiwan remains Swaziland. In the entire continent, the only country that still outlaws and criminalizes political activism and political parties is Swaziland. In the whole continent, the only remaining country where we have an absolute monarchy is Swaziland. So Swaziland is maintained and sustained by Western imperial forces. And this explains why it was easy for Swaziland to sign these prisoner exchange programs where America could come and dump what it purports to be dangerous prisoners in Swaziland. Not so long ago, it has agreed to literally sell the records of our health as citizens of this country to America in exchange for money. So through all these things, you can see a consistent pattern of a country that is always not in alignment with the rest of the region and the rest of the continent. But over and above that, you do also have domestic players, mainly are the remnants of settler colonialism who came from the apartheid South Africa, who, running away from a democratic dispensation, decided to take permanent residence and ultimately citizenship in Swaziland, who are running most of the domestic entities there. So simply put, the native Swazi has been excluded and alienated, both from the politics, the economy, the culture, and even social identity. And all these things have been replaced, especially the cultural and social identity have been replaced with royal identity. Most of these things that people regard as Swazi culture are strangely royal culture. It's not necessarily Swazi culture. So there has been this attempt by royal aristocrats to alienate the being of the Swazi and replace it with royal supremacy, as it were.
Right, comrade. Let's talk about, and support that you can get from neighboring countries around you. Do you think that neighboring countries around you have a role to play, or they must play a role in countering these injustice, helping countering these injustice?
In fact, we are quite upset, particularly with neighboring countries. You know, I was saying to you, students are on the streets complaining about what is happening in tertiary institution.
Right.
I'm saying workers, public sector workers, are on the streets complaining about the government that is saying it doesn't have money. I don't want even to reference to the
Mhm.
already collapsed healthcare and education in
Right.
Swaziland. And what happens is that 10 billion emalangen, which is equivalent to rents, was spent building a hotel for a king's birthday.
Wow.
This hotel that when it was approved, we were told was going to be around 345 million
Mm-hmm.
to complete, is now nearing 10 billion and it's still not finished.
Mm.
The only time it was opened was when the king was having his birthday recently. Who were there? The president of South Africa, the
Wow.
president of Zimbabwe, the
Wow.
president of Mozambique, the king of Lesotho. So you can see that these leaders in our region in particular have become morally vacuous, because
Yeah.
I can't for the life of me understand that in a country that is collapsed socio-economic, how does Cyril Ramaphosa reconcile
Right.
being in such a lavish place in a exorbitant individual's birthday when many Swazis are here in South Africa as undocumented foreign nationals who are hiding from South Africans who are demanding that they must go back to their native countries. So you could see that we are seated in the continent with leaders who are failing to be the sounding board to their peers and to call each other out to say, but how do you expect us to attend an individual birthday party that costs so much money when the country is struggling
Right.
with delivery of basic services?
Right. But comrade, yeah, I'm not cutting you, but I just want to chip in here. Don't you think that it is because these heads of states or these presidents that you rightly mentioned are in bed with the imperialist project? They are not really for the people. Even in their various countries, they're advancing the wishes and aspirations of what the imperialist want. So it's because they are in bed, they are in the same, caucus. That is the reason why they are not really perturbed about what is happening to the ordinary people, in Swaziland. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. I think we are spot on. And this is what makes a mockery
Yeah.
of their calls, even when they are making legitimate, justifiable calls.
So,
Because how does South Africa hope the world will take her serious when
mm,
it calls, rightfully so, for justice and liberty in Palestine,
mm,
in Western Sahara, in
right,
Cuba, when right next door to South Africa, there is an autocratic monarch that South Africa is not only quiet on, but is effectively being an accomplice,
right,
because it was the monies of ordinary Swazis that was being spent there entertaining these leaders I'm speaking about. So yes, these leaders have become sadly shop stewards of imperialism. It
right,
is no longer about the native people of our continent settle. It is about themselves. And this explains why, when term of office is nearing its end, we see what we are witnessing in Zimbabwe, with Mnangagwa wanting to extend their term of offices, because these leaders are not for the people, and they are not about the people, and they are not about the development of the continent, but they are about themselves and how long they can remain in power at the expense of the ordinary people. No
right.
wonder the economies are doing so badly in all these countries.
Right, right. We cannot rely on these governments, on these heads of state who are being compromised by the West to fight for our freedom as a people. And so that is the reason why we often rely on, progressive movements. That is why within the space that there was a crackdown on activists in Swaziland, a powerful solidarity movement emerged that stand shoulder to shoulder, with you in your struggles from some progressive movement. What do you think international solidarity play in the movement of the people of Swaziland? What role does the international solidarity play in those movements?
International solidarity play a very critical role. In actual fact, had it not been that solidarity that we have just correctly referenced to, I doubt some of us will be seated here having this interview today.
Right, sure.
Because it is these multiple voices that call out these regimes that act as defense mechanism for revolutionaries who are waging this struggle.
Right.
And that's why for us as Pudemo, we think that what needs to happen, we've got to intensify and double the networking and collaborative work of all these progressive movements across the continent, the diaspora, and the entire world.
Right.
What is happening in Sudan has got to get all of us concerned and troubled. Right. We've got to be picketing against our own governments for remaining silent in what is happening in Sudan, all these things that we're seeing across the continent. So we as Swazis, as much as we welcome solidarity and support, we remain steadfast in making sure that we equally offer solidarity and support, because we can't just be recipients of solidarity without us demonstrating practically that we equally feel deep down the pain and suffering of any working class oppressed person in the world, irrespective of the geographic jurisdiction. So international solidarity has got a huge role to play, particularly at this era where we see the rise of fascist imperialist government under the leadership of Trump. There is need to be renewed effort and more collaborative work amongst progressive forces to make sure that we expand ourselves and give solidarity and support to the rest of the progressive movement across the world.
Right. It is important that we gather ourselves and give our solidarity support to the rest of the progressive movement, because our struggles are interconnected. They are not isolations, and we need to come together to fight our one common enemy, which is imperialism. Thank you so much, comrade. We are glad having you today.
Thank you very much for having us, and have a great day too.
And those were insightful conversations right there. Now, from that conversation, we move to two movements that have their own direct relationships with the state repression and the question of what genuine people's power look like. The Socialist Movement of Ghana speaks to Swaziland and the broader Pan-African failure to hold authoritarian governments accountable. And Abatlali Basim John Dolo from South Africa, a movement built in shack settlement and a threat, speaks to what's organizing from below demands of all of us. Let's hear them.
I am Chuso Mohapi from Abatlali Basim the Sheikh Dwellers Movement of South Africa. As Abatlali, I understand that solidarity is an indispensable variable. So we extend our deepest solidarity to all progressive forces in Swaziland who are struggling against the absolute monarchy of the Swati king and of course of the Tikundla system. Ours is just a solidarity to comrade, to remain strong in this struggle. Of course, democracy will not come easy. As we have learned from South Africa, how long it took for South Africa to be liberated from the apartheid system. We call on all progressive forces around the continent of Africa to unite and show true solidarity with comrades from Swaziland who are fighting against this system of Tinkundla and of course of the absolute monarchy of the Swati king. And we also call on those who are progressive in terms of law or otherwise to build solidarity and give us ideas on how we can handle the situation, of course, that is faced by Nontetelelo, who's been facing fabricated charges by the Swati police. And we express our deepest solidarity to her and hope that she is safe wherever she is, and hope that the Swazi people will rise up and fight against such trumped up charges that activists that are of course face during these times when they're fighting for what is right. So we call on the Swazi king and of course the Swati police to refrain from criminalizing the struggle of activism in Swaziland. And we hope and pray that the life of Nontetelelo will be preserved. We call, of course, all progressive forces around the African continent to keep supporting the struggle of the Swazis, because there is a struggle that is, of course, against a system that has instilled dictatorship in the country of Swaziland. So we, as Abahlali, express our deepest solidarity with every progressive forces that seeks to bring change in Swaziland and bring democracy in Swaziland and do away with the Mpunza system. Thank you.
The struggle in Swaziland is a struggle for participatory democracy, and it is part of Africa's unfinished liberation and the global battle against imperialism and capitalist rule. The socialist movement of Ghana was very horrified to learn about the brutalities and use of force by the monarch to silence the young people of Swaziland who were requesting and who are still requesting for a better form of government. For the women in SMG, we were horrified when the news broke out that a young woman is under state-sponsored attack for organizing. The regime's attempt to frame Comrade Nontsenseli as a would-be murderer is a clear effort to demonize a revolution. The systemic crackdown on activists, students, and youth leaders in Swaziland is not accidental. It is carefully planned to deter other citizens from holding the monarch accountable, hence resulting to extreme measures because it can no longer justify its existence through popular consent. The current political landscape in Swaziland has evolved into what we call a fundamental crisis because this escalation of state-sponsored aggression is a sign of a regime in crisis and the fear of an irrepressible tide of change. The goal for a democratic Swaziland is no longer a distant aspiration or goal. This is why the monarch is carefully and forcefully trying to abort it. When a group of people are subjected to suffering, disrespect, oppression for a long time, they would one day rise up and fight for their freedom. This is the lived reality of the Swazi people. Looking at this, we the women's wing identify that the current political resistance is not born of abstract theory but material desperation of the people. This regime has presided over a total collapse of public services, leaving the population to live in systemic neglect. Their education system is in ruins. The state is failing to address the high unemployment and pervasive poverty, whilst state resources are channeled to maintain the king's extravagant lifestyle and his machinery of violence. The monarchy has lost its legitimacy. This is most visible in the energy and fearlessness of the nation's youth, who have become the primary engine of this revolution. And we will not allow this revolution to be criminalized. In all this, it is important to commend Swayoko for maintaining their fire and sharpening their resolve while continuing to stand as a vanguard for the revolution despite the brutal crackdown. We must call out the hypocrisy of the Western powers that poses as defenders of democracy and human rights. These powers are quick to adopt an aggressive stand and implement sanctions against nations like Cuba, Venezuela, citing as a lack of democratic freedom. But funny enough, they are silent regarding the absolute monarchy in Swaziland. The selective outreach and silence of these imperialist states exposes a single truth. Imperialism does not defend democracy, it defends its strategic and economic interests. This pattern is evident in contemporary crises across the Middle East and beyond, where imperialist intervention and coalitions determine which crimes are punished and which are condoned. Liberation is not granted by imperialist patron, that we must note. It has always been won from below through struggle, organization, and unity. As the women's wing of the socialist movement of Ghana, we stand unshakably in solidarity with the people of Swaziland, with Podemo and Swayoko, and with everyone refusing to bow to repression. To the activists facing repression today, we say you are not alone. Your struggle is seen, your courage is respected, and the socialist movement of Ghana stands with you always.
And now we move to our dispatches from Africa. Yesterday was the 1st of May, and the voices from that day deserves to be heard today. We bring you May Day dispatches from the TUC in Ghana, speaking to workers' conditions under ongoing austerity, and from Zimbabwe, where workers continue to organize under conditions of economic collapse and political suppression. Let's get into it.
Celebration of marking May Day, celebrating May Day or marking May Day flows from a history in which people fought to demand that workers are given their due. And this is a history that says that people actually laid down their lives. They died at the Haymarket in the Americas, just fighting for the rights of workers, for the workers to get their due. And it's the same issues that we continue to experience today. Today, workers are saying that after with the theme, after the economic recovery and everything else, then what? Then what? What about the workers who are working and making the wheels of production turn? So we're looking at a situation where workers must be given their due. Workers must be given what is their place. Workers must be given what they deserve after fighting to ensure that production goes on, after fighting and giving their due at work, just to make sure that the country runs, just to make sure that our hospitals work, just to make sure that water flows through our taps, just to make sure that we have our markets running, etc., etc. These are all people. And when we look at workers, we're not looking at only people who have white-collar jobs. And for us as a country, over 80% of our economy, we're told, are in the informal sector, and they actually make the wheels of production turn. They actually make our country. It's not only those in the formal sector, but especially those in the informal sector. So we're looking at they having their due, and we're saying that, yes, we are at a place where we're told that the macroeconomic stability, or there is macroeconomic stability. And then what? How does that help cushion the worker, the ordinary worker in the street? How does that help cushion the worker in the offices? How does that help the ordinary worker on a day-to-day basis? How they have to run their lives, run their homes, run their families, etc. So these are issues that we're looking at in this year's May Day. For a long time, especially the TUC has been clamoring for a living wage. And we're looking at a living wage where we have a family of, say, 4 or 5 or 6, where you don't necessarily have to go and negotiate a minimum wage and get peanuts, because government has issues. There are issues of how the economy is growing and so forth. This year, we have so much debt, or we're paying our debts, or things, the economy hasn't run that well. And so we need to give this, we need to give that. But a living wage which is static, so that the economic indicators revolve around it. So, I mean, basically, this is what the TUC has campaigned upon at a time. Perhaps if we got that living wage, we're better off as workers than having to negotiate minimum wage every year, which actually doesn't help take the ordinary worker anywhere. I mean, with a minimum wage below 25 cities, really, there is not much we can do with that. And I know that if you are working in the public sector or in the formal sector, then perhaps you are also being pinched in the pocket. So this is what May Day is basically looking at as a theme, this year. And we're hoping that going forward, perhaps in our campaigning, in our negotiations, which for the wage openness, etc., we would be able to get some good things going for the ordinary working people of the country. So if you are somebody who even employs, you're also a worker, and work is going on in your interest just to ensure that this country runs. So the people who are the ones toiling are the ones who have to benefit going forward, we think, as TUC and even organized labor. So those are some of the discussions that we're looking at.
Comrade, good morning. My name is Comrade Adim Tero. I'm the General Secretary of the United Food and Allied Workers Union, a union actually doing or representing interests of the workers in the food industry in Zimbabwe. Yes, we understand we are just 2 days away from commemorating a very, very important day in the history of the working class struggles, the Workers' Day. Unfortunately, in my country, there's nothing to celebrate for. There is serious erosion of the gains of 18th century. Everything which was 44 has been since eroded. The system of capitalism have taken away every trump, every benefit, everything. And the workers are now living like beggars in a country full of opportunities, full of resources. Not only that, in my country today, there is a political development which is happening, which is also seeking to take away the freedom of the workers. As we are talking right now, as we are interviewing right now, we were barred from celebrating this year's celebrations. I'll share with you the letter from the police barring our May Day commemorations, citing possible uprising of the workers. That is what is actually happening. That is what is actually happening. Sorry for disturbing. So we do have about 2 federations in our country: the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, the Zimbabwe Federation of Trade Unions, and we are a federation in the food industry specifically. We were allowed to gather in other towns, we were barred to participate, to hold our celebrations in the city center because of what is currently politically obtained in our country. The situation in our country, we are likely to see another coup, a repeat of the 2017. There's so much friction within the ruling parties and PF, where the other faction is seeking to amend the constitution. There's what they call constitutional amendment number 3, which seeks now to extend the term of office for the current president from 5 years to 7 years. Basically, they are trying to extend the election or the current period of election by another 2 years. And this is violently being rejected by another faction within the ruling party, including the progressive forces in our country. And this is the reason why we are seeing us being bad, because we are being identified as a radical union, which may cause, if we are to celebrate those wild case protests and so forth. Coming to the economic wise, we are actually a rich country, but unfortunately there is a clique which is controlling the economy of our country. This clique is composed of unelected but politically connected individuals, and these are the people running the show, including funding the amendment of the constitution. The current minimum wage right now, because the economy now, our economy is now heavily informalized, and it's being driven by mining, agriculture. But the mining section, it's more like heavily informalized. Of course, about 99% of our activities are informalized. A very few section are doing so as formal activities. But still, the informalization now, this is where you find the rich now encouraging informalization, but of course, them benefiting from that informalization. The money they get from the informal sector is not channeled to the treasury, but to the individuals' pockets. So they end up now being in charge of of the economy. So you find that the minimum wage right now is averaging around $150 US dollars. That's the average wage for a formal worker in our country. And the government is the biggest employer today in our country. Why? Because we've seen a lot of companies close or downsizing. And also the issue of mechanization have played again into the hands of of these great individuals. So as we are celebrating today, we are actually seeking to resist. We are seeking to the clarion call is to resist the machinations of this clique within the ruling parties and PF, and also to fight against the capitalism as a whole. Because right now, as we speak, I can tell you, people are living or are subject to slavery-like working conditions. And this is what we are seeking to revolt against at the working class of Zimbabwe. We are regrouping to see if we can meet the state head on, so that they allow us to proceed. They can allow us to proceed with our commemorations. So this is what is happening in my country today. Things are very bad.
And now we continue with our word of the day. Today's word of the day is democracy. And given everything we've heard tonight, it could only be more fitting. So stay with us as we unpack what this word really means, where it comes from, and what it has been made to do.
You are still watching African Speaks on Pan-African Television. This is our word of the day segment with me, Rashida Abubakar. Our word of the day is democracy, and we are going to be honest with you about it. Democracy is one of the most used and most abused words in politics. It is celebrated in Washington, preached in Brussels, and used to justify sanctions, invasions, and coups. It is the word deployed to remove governments the Western dislikes and protects once it doesn't. So before we talk about what democracy is, we must talk about what it has been made to mean. Democracy is, at its roots, the rule of the people. Government not over the people, but by them. Simply enough, except for the question, which people are ruling, in whose interest are they ruling, and how are they ruling? Democracy emerged alongside an ascendant capitalist class, which was constructing new system of governance that suited the agenda. Working people, women, and the black people in the West all had to fight for decades to say what they have in these democracies. Writing in 1917, Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin said democracy in a capitalist society was democracy for an insignificant minority, democracy for the rich. For the socialist tradition and for the national liberation tradition, one of the most important struggles was to expand this democracy, to make it a weapon in the hands of the workers, peasants, and for all those who sought to build a just world. This advance of democracy in the socialist countries and newly independent countries of Asia and Africa frightened the West, which spends extensive resources trying to wreck these experiments. For instance, Patrick Lumumba, elected legitimate beloved, was assassinated with direct Western involvement within months of Congolese independence. The dictator who replaced him was protected for 30 years because he was their dictator. The pattern is consistent. Democracy means governments that serves Western interests. When Africans elect leaders who serve African interests, democracy suddenly becomes a crisis requiring intervention. Today's liberal democracy, election every few years, political parties, and parliament sounds reasonable on paper. In practice, it is a system where corporation funds campaign, media empire shapes opinion, and the real decisions about war, debt, land, and resources are made by the people who are never on any ballots. This is what Nkrumah called neocolonialism in its political form. A democracy in which the IMF can dictate your national budget is not a democracy. It is a performance. The question before radical Africans today is how to deepen and extend our understanding of democracy. Remember Sankara, who brought governance to the village level, making the ordinary citizen not just a voter, but an active builder of society. Cabral organized village assemblies and popular tribunals in liberated zones of Guinea-Bissau. Nyerere rooted democracy in African communal traditions, collective decision, Ubuntu, the village council. They understood what the ballot box alone cannot deliver, that real democracy must be economic as well as political. What does your vote mean to you if you cannot eat? If the land your grandparents farmed is leased to foreign corporations, political freedoms without economic sovereignty is a half-built house. True democracy is not a gift government gives to citizens. It is the power that citizens must build, defend, and constantly deepen. This is our word of the day on African Speaks. I am Rashida Abubakar. Know your power, organize your people, and remember, democracy is not what they give us. It is what we are still fighting to build.
Five days ago, on the 27th of April, South Africa marked Freedom Day, the anniversary of the 1994 elections that ended apartheid and brought millions of South Africans to the polls for the first time in their lives. It was a historic moment, and it would be dishonest to treat it as anything less. But 32 years on, Freedom Day also asks harder questions. The land has not been returned. The wealth gap between black and white South Africans has by several measures grown wider. Movements like Abahlali Bassem John Delo are still fighting for basic human dignity under a democratic government. This is not a reason to dismiss 1994. It is a reason to take seriously what freedom actually requires beyond the day it is declared. We place Freedom Day alongside Swaziland tonight, not to flatten the difference between them, but to hold both honestly. One country, 3 decades into democracy, still reckoning with what it means, and other when the right to even begin what's reckoning and what is being suppressed by force. Both are parts of the same unfinished story of African liberation. Let's hear it. On April 27th, we marked Freedom Day, when South Africans voted in the country's first democratic elections. This day was the culmination of a decades-long struggle against the brutal apartheid system, which discriminated against the black people of the country in every aspect of life and unleashed innumerable brutalities on them. The victory against this system, which has its tentacles in every sphere of life, required the sacrifices of hundreds of thousands of lives across generations. We remember the historic Freedom Charter, which was adopted by Congress of the People in 1955. which not only stated that every man and woman shall have the right to vote, but also that a people shall share in the country's wealth and the land that shall be shared among those who work it. Remember the Sharpeville massacre, where nearly 100 people were killed for opposing the discriminatory pass law. We also recollect the thousands who plunged into the armed struggle in the following years, leaving their homes and families and mobilizing under the banner of Mkhonto Weziwe, the African National Congress, and the South African Communist Party. The South African struggle for liberation was rich and diverse, spanning every section of society. Rooted in a political mobilization of the masses, it encompassed armed struggle, a host of underground organizations, trade unions, youth organizations, sports clubs, religious organizations, and many more collectives. The apartheid regime sought to limit the humanity of black people, and they in turn responded by reaffirming their collective strength and their united voice. From the student-led Soweto uprising to worker strike and rent boycotts, the black people of South Africa, especially the working class, forced the regime into a permanent state of crisis. However, the struggle was not of the South Africans alone. A legendary role was played by Cuba, whose forces engaged the apartheid regime's armies in Angola. Operation Carlota broke the back of the regime's military power, played a vital role in the liberation of Angola and Namibia, and hastened the negotiations to end apartheid. Across Africa, liberation movements and leaders from Tanzania's Julius Nyerere and Mozambique's Samora Machel to Angola's Agostinho Neto and Ghana's own Kwame Nkrumah were in the forefront of providing material support and mobilizing international support against the apartheid regime. Throughout this period, the USSR provided vital backing, training and arming South African revolutionaries, and amplifying the global call to dismantle apartheid. At the same time, global solidarity movements intensified pressure on the regime. Trade unions, student organizations, and anti-racist groups across the world mobilized boycotts, sanctions, and divestment campaigns. Cultural and sporting isolations further delegitimized apartheid on the world stage. Across the global south, the struggle against apartheid was everyone's cause. In the global north, despite the brutality and discrimination of apartheid, governments prevaricated. However, pressure from the grassroots forced their hand, and they were too forced to condemn South Africa. All these factors forced the apartheid regime to begin making concessions. However, it took many long years before the system was dismantled politically, and elections were held in 1994, which saw Nelson Mandela elected as the first president. April 27th, Freedom Day, was a struggle where the South African people, joined by radical forces across the world, took down a regime rooted in discrimination, racism, and inequality. While the formal institutions and logic of apartheid have been dismantled, South Africa continues to face its economic variants, plagued as it is by inequality and crippling levels of poverty. The struggle against apartheid is incomplete until the lives of the majority of people are transformed. It is this struggle that unions like NUMSA and organizations like Abahlali Basim Jondolo continue to wage today. It is this struggle that trade unions, farmers' organizations, and people's movement from Cape to Cairo and Morocco to Madagascar are waging. The promise, the challenge, and the call of Freedom Day beckons. And all too soon, we've come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Speaks right here from Pan-African Television, which came to you live from our studios at Abelimpe, 48 Swanika Street. From understanding the repression ongoing in Swaziland and marking May Day celebration and marking Freedom's Day and understanding what democracy means, one thread running through all of it, and it is ours to carry forward. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and until next week, Africa must speak and Africa must be heard. My name is Victoria Wilson. Have a good evening.